Hi guys, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Tonight's session is on Photoshop Astro Processing for Beginners. And Josh is going to go over a few things that basically if you're a beginner you should know, and if you figure it out then you can move on to the next stuff. But before that, as always, our image of the week for next week, Derek Santiago wasn't able to come on this week, or maybe he didn't get my or I wasn't able to send him an invite, but this coming week, is Chris Mazza with his Rosette Nebula. And let me pull that up for you. I'm going to have to share my screen. And as you know, or maybe as you know, we've started doing this rolling or lagging week thing where Chris will be invited to come on next week and go over his image of the week. And if you want to see it or whatever, check it out on our Google site, or of course our new website, theastroimagingchannel.com. And please check that out. I should have started with that because we're kind of excited about it. But yeah, check out the website, and you'll be able to catch all of our sessions, past and upcoming, there. Getting my screen share back. And that's all I've got, so I'm going to hand it right over to Josh, and Josh can start up with his presentation.
Thanks, Adam. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So tonight I am going to basically just introduce the kind of introductory ideas in processing in Photoshop, and show you, I want to show you some of the basic things that you can do in Photoshop, and then we'll just kind of real quickly run through processing of an image just to get you something to actually look at here. So, yes.
Josh, interrupt you right off the bat. Is his screen mirror imaged for everybody? Are you seeing everything backwards? Or is it just me?
Looks like here.
Looks fine to me.
It looks fine to you guys?
Yep.
All right. I guess we're going to run with it then. Never mind. Ignore me.
Alrighty. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I will open up a different picture here real quick than the one I'm going to process, just to kind of explain a couple of kind of items to get us going here. So I'm opening up a picture of M42. And the first thing that I want to talk about is just the histogram, which is kind of going to be one of the most important things for you to look at when you're processing in Photoshop. When you are a lot of the way through processing an image, you want to actually have a histogram that looks more similar to this right here. And I will come over to the other picture, and I will show you what a histogram might look like at the beginning of processing an image. And it'll look like this. So if you stack and calibrate your images correctly and bring it into Photoshop, typically as a 16-bit TIFF file, you're going to see something like this, where everything is very, very dark in the image. And if you come and look at your histogram here, and depending on what version of Photoshop you have, there's lots of different ways to bring it up. You can bring it up on your panel up here, or if you just open up a Levels or a Curves tab, then you can actually look at the histogram. So I'm going to show you the histogram on M42 first, because there's more going on in that. It's going to be a little bit easier to explain to you what's going on in this histogram. So this basically is a kind of statistical display of the data that is actually in your image. And if you are familiar with the idea of a histogram at all, essentially there is a bar a vertical bar coming across everywhere in your image, and it's telling you how many of these pixels have a certain value of brightness. So if you look over here, at the very left side of my histogram, that would be 0, which is black. If you look all the way over at this side, it is 255, which would be white. So if there's something in your histogram that is completely white, then it's going to have a value level of 255. If it's completely black, it's going to have a value level of 0. And what you're typically shooting for in an Astro image is a histogram that looks sort of like this one here. You want it to be off of the left-hand wall a little bit, because we don't want to clip any of our data here. And so you'll hear people, if you're submitting an image, talking about how it looks like you clipped your blacks or your background is too dark. The sky is not actually pitch black, and so a lot of times beginners in Astro imaging will actually make their sky pitch black. So when they're processing an image, maybe their data is not that good, or they just want to see it pitch black. So at the very end of processing, they might drag this black point slider all the way over here and make the background look completely black. So if I do this and I hit OK, then I bring back up my levels, and I'm going to show you where you can bring up levels here. You go up to Image, Adjustments, and Levels. You can also do hotkey as Control-L. But so if you bring that up, and now you look at my levels, you can see that that histogram moved all the way over to the left-hand side. And now at the 0 value, you can see that there's lots of pixels that actually have that 0 value, and you don't ever want that in an Astro image. Maybe occasionally you have just a very small percentage of the pixels there, but typically you want to make sure that you have separation off the wall. So I'm going to undo that, and to undo that in Photoshop you can either hit Control-Z, or you can come up to Edit and undo levels, or you can actually do step backwards. So I'm going to undo that so that I can bring this histogram back to where it should be. So that's your black point. The black point where you want it to end up on the end of an image is kind of, or where you want your background to end up is kind of up to you. It's a little bit subjective, but I think that most imagers end up with values anywhere between 15, 30, maybe 45 at the highest point. So before I go forward, I'm going to show you how you can actually measure that and see what your background value is. So if you come over to the left-hand side of Photoshop, over here, there is this function here. Adam, are you able to actually see my pointer as I'm moving around?
I can, yes.
Okay, great. So over here, if you right-click on this, it comes up as an eyedropper tool, but what I want to bring up is the color sampler tool. So I'll right click on this over here, and then I'll left click on the color sampler tool. And what this is going to do is it's going to give you information about a pixel that you actually click on. So I just left clicked right here in kind of a dark region in the picture, and what it does is it comes over here on your info tab, and it gives you the values of the red, green, and blue channel. Excuse me, in that area for this pixel. And so you know that those values are 14, 14, and 15. So if you have a fairly well color balanced background, then like I said, you might want to end up with your background being somewhere between 15 and 30, depending on what you like, what's more subjective. So I actually end up having that a little bit higher, and some people might like that more up in like the 30 range, where it brightens up the image a little bit more. Some people like that kind of darker look where it's down here around 15. But if you bring this black point slider over, like I said, you can see where I have that dropper tool there. I'm coming down to 2, 2, and 3 for my values here, and that's something that you want to avoid. So getting a little ahead of myself here, but I just want to help explain the histogram. So while I have this picture open, I can also come over here to the right-hand slider on the Levels tab, and this one is your white point. And so if you move this white point around, you can see what's happening, where I'm actually brightening the image. So this is telling you that almost none of my pixels are completely white in this image, which is also a thing that you typically are going to want to shoot for. Sometimes your very brightest stars, maybe down in the core of M42 or some of the super bright ones out here, might have a little bit of white in them. So if I click my sampler tool over here on this very bright star, even that one is not completely white. So you can see the values here for the blue star: 235, 247, and 249. And that's sort of what you would expect for a blue star. If I come and zoom in here very close on the stars in the trap, which are pretty bright in this, and bring this down just a little bit so we can see the value of that. That one's still not quite blown out either. So that's good. That's a good sign. If you take too long of an exposure, or you process your data in a way so you kind of just keep stretching the brightest stars, then you'll probably end up with a few areas in your picture that are actually what you would hear called as blown out, which is completely white. So that is the white point slider. So when you open up an image for the first time and you have nothing done on it, you might see something more like this in your histogram, where you actually have no information all the way up to the right hand side. And to make the most out of your picture, you actually want there to be information pretty much all the way from the range of 0 all the way over to 255. So you might want to just slide that in just a little bit there, right up to the edge of the information there. You can see there's kind of a black line coming along the bottom of the histogram there. So that's telling you that there's a little bit of information even all the way up right to that point. Once you get past that, there's nothing there, so there's actually no information there. So I'm going to come back to this M42 image, and I'm going to talk about the midpoint slider. So the midpoint slider is going to be extremely useful for you when you're actually processing images. The white point slider, typically you're going to leave that alone as soon as you make that first move that I just showed you on the other image. After that, you can pretty much forget it. There's not really much need to ever touch that again. So you're going to be working on the black point slider, like I was showing you before, and the midpoint slider. And the midpoint slider is going to really be what you use to control kind of the brightness of all the moves that you make in Photoshop. So as you can see, if I slide this all the way out to the right, it's taking away what we call like the stretch of the image, or you're removing the stretch of the image. If you move it all the way to the left, you're actually stretching it, and you're bringing that information further and further to a bright spot. So I'll show you what this does actually to the histogram here. If I hit OK and I bring up the levels again, what I did is I just moved that whole histogram over to the right. And if you're following what I'm saying, that makes sense, because I told you that the values over here on the left are 0, which is black. The values over here on the right, 255, which is white. And since the image was sort of dark in the background, we had kind of the majority of our values were over here on the left-hand side, down around between 15 and 40, which the majority of that information is coming from the sky background. And if I undo what I just did there, I can kind of tell you the makeup of where a lot of this information comes from. The majority of this is coming from the sky background. And as you kind of move over to the right, you start getting some of this faint nebula, kind of these regions down in here. So I can come over and drop another sample probably down here. And if I drop that sample down here, you see that I'm at 45, 34, and 28. And that would be right around in here. So that makes sense. And as you kind of come over to the right, that's when you start getting more and more of your stars, some of your brighter nebulosity, and and just the brighter regions in your image. So like all the way up here at this kind of region in 230 or so is where you're getting those bright stars like I clicked on. And if I just show you maybe one more data point, kind of a bright area, but not the brightest area in general, this is probably going to be somewhere around, let's see here, 112, 91, 119. So that's about right. If you look at the histogram again, that's going to be sort of right here in the middle. So you know, it kind of gives you an idea. If you go around on a picture, even if you open any picture up, you can use that eyedropper tool just to start sampling the picture all over the place and kind of get an idea of what the histogram represents. So when you go to process an image, like I said, you're shooting for this shape of a histogram. If you have a field that's got all kinds of nebulosity in it, it's easier to get this histogram to have a wider shape. And that's what you really want ultimately, is kind of wider shaped histogram with sort of a soft curve dropping off over to the right here. If you start seeing lots of spikes in it, then you know you're doing something wrong with your data, because you should have just a very smooth and kind of continual curve coming down here. Sometimes if people are processing an image in 8-bit and then bring it back into a 6 16-bit format, then you might start getting some of these little spiky things that you would see in a histogram. So this is what you want to shoot for. It's kind of this nice smooth curve drop off. And so the shape that I'm talking about here, if you're using say something like a small galaxy in a big kind of wide field where all you have is stars and just stars in a small galaxy, then almost your entire sky background is going to be dark, as it should be in that picture, and your histogram is going to be a lot narrower. And if you think about it, that makes sense, because you only have mostly information from the sky background, because it takes up the majority of the area of the image. So it might be just a much thinner histogram, and then drop down pretty steeply and then come over. And that's fine if you're taking a picture that is mostly made up of the background, maybe a planetary nebula, also small planetary nebula, then you're going to get something like that, and that's fine to have it like that. But you're still aiming for the same thing, which is sort of a curve coming down and just kind of dropping off in a smooth fashion. And then you want to still, like I said, you want to make sure that you're making the most out of all of these, out of your picture, and using up kind of the full range of that's possible. And in a 16-bit picture, that's what you have, is you have from 0 to 255. I think technically you have from 0 to 256. But the point stands is that you want to take up pretty much that entire range. If you like having just a little darker background, you can bring this over, like I said, and it kind of will squeeze that histogram over to the left a little more. But this is kind of the most important thing to understand in Photoshop. And I could spend a lot more time on it, going into real technical details. But ultimately, we're going to try and keep things simple tonight, but I just want to kind of hit home on the histogram, because we're going to use that for doing a handful of things tonight, and I want to explain it thoroughly. I'm going to pause real quick and make sure there's no questions, Adam, before I move on.
I don't see any questions. First of all, guys, Q&A is enabled. Ask your questions. And Josh, maybe just for the sake of beginners, I'm still seeing my whole entire screen reversed. So I see this histogram backwards, and it's driving me nuts, but it kind of is pointing out a question. When we tell people to expose for the histogram, with the histogram right there in front of you, what are we talking about?
So you might, if I understand what you're asking correctly, you might hear somebody tell you, if you're taking an image with a DSLR, you might hear them tell you to get 1/3 of the way across the histogram, or get off the wall with the histogram. And if they're telling you to do that, that's sort of what they're trying to show you right here. Like, the back of your camera is going to show you a histogram. I'm going to do just a little stretch to kind of bring this over to 1/3 of the way across the image here. And you can see this is probably about 1/3 of the way, maybe even just a little bit more. There you go. So when people tell you to expose on your camera, 1/3 of the way, or if you're exposing with a CCD, they tell you to clear the left-hand wall. What they're trying to tell you is basically to get your information kind of above the read noise floor. And the read noise, we're not going to go into too much depth on that, but essentially your camera has some noise in it. But the reason they're telling you to do that is because if you don't get your histogram off the wall, then you're basically clipping your data. You're going to get kind of a very black image, and there's just no information in there. So if I slide this all the way over here like this, and then I show you this histogram, there's no information in here, none whatsoever, just because it's just black data. So there's nothing you can do with black data. You can't stretch it any further. You can't recover it. So once it's down there at 0, there's nothing you can do with it. And that's why people tell you to expose, to get it off the wall, because otherwise it's just going to be noise in your image. The same thing, though, they might tell you, well, be careful not to blow out your histogram. So if I come here and go back to where I was before, they might tell you be careful and don't blow out your image. And so if you're shooting in really bad light pollution or something, then you might get a histogram that starts looking more like this, or it might even come even further over here, which is like kind of in the middle, and sometimes even worse if you're in real bad light pollution like this. And so if your picture coming out on the back of the camera or on your CCD has a histogram that looks like this, then you're basically clipping a lot of information over here on the bright side. I can actually kind of bring this up a little bit too, just so you can see that what'll happen here. And this looks like a blown out histogram here. So this would mean that you have information that's lost on the white side instead of the black side, and so the everything is too bright. You can't recover any of this information. You can see even if I bring this black point slider all the way over to the right, I'm still blown out over here where I told you I was blown out. There's nothing I can do to recover this information anymore. It's blown out. It's 255, 255, 255. You can see that over here up in my info tab. So there's no way to turn that into anything but just super white data. And aside from that, you're actually really compressing kind of the range of the information that you can get out of your picture here, because as you see, there's nothing over here on the left-hand side of the histogram. So you've kind of really compressed everything into a tiny space instead of making full use of your histogram. And so that's why people will tell you to kind of expose for the histogram. So if you get a good looking histogram coming kind of back on the back of the camera, this is what you're looking for. You want it to clear the left-hand wall just a little bit, and you want it to come down here and make pretty much the full use of your image. This is another thing that you might see if you're kind of overexposing a little bit. You might not get too many super bright white parts, but your histogram might look like this, where you have a lot of information kind of up here in the high side of your image, and you're not going to want that either. You want as much as possible to kind of get all the way down to the floor over here before you get to the bright side. Is that what you're asking, Adam?
That's exactly what I'm asking. And Lance right now is asking, does the fact that the amplitude of the histogram clips at the top make any difference? And I think that's because when you have the levels palette up, it appeared as if the histogram top was clipped.
Correct.
But I think it only appears that way.
Correct. Actually, I haven't brought my histogram back up since I went to Photoshop CC, so if somebody wants to tell me how to bring that up, I'd be happy to bring that up, but I don't remember how to do that in the new version.
Well, you could probably, Control C, or wait, let me think, no, Control M or Control L will bring up levels. Control M will bring up...
right, but to actually bring up, you can bring up the full histogram where it doesn't show.
That should be in your info palette, right? Your whole screen is backwards to me. I'm going to be of no help.
In the older versions, it's in Windows histogram.
Yeah.
Windows. Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, I guess this one's not showing the whole one either. So no. It's basically, it looks like it's clipped. We're not clipped here. Essentially, it's truncating up here, but there's as many. So I guess maybe one thing I didn't clearly specify is that the height of it shows how many pixels are actually at that value, and so depending on your image size, if your image size is too big, then you might have more pixels than your histogram's actually going to show.
And it should be noted, Josh, well, I'm sure you know this, but just for the guys we've got listening in, that this is an 8-bit representation of a 16-bit image. And so a lot of, while it looks like there are 256 levels in this, there's actually 16 million or something like that. There's a whole lot more levels than that. So while it may look like it's clipped at the top, in fact, there could be variations of levels in between there.
Yes, very good point, Alex. Okay, so Adam, is that it for the questions for now?
That's it for the questions for now, but remember, guys, Q&A, that's your spot.
Okay, so the other thing that I want to talk about real quickly before I get going too far is layers. And then when we kind of go into doing a little bit of processing, I can show you some other stuff. And What did I just do with this here? Here we go. I'm bringing this up to the middle so you can actually see what I'm talking about. So one of the big ideas in Photoshop is, I may not get the technical terms just perfect, but is non-destructive processing. And the idea is that if you do your moves in Photoshop, whether it's a levels or a curves adjustment or a saturation or whatever you might do, if you do that, and so say that I'm coming over here and I'm stretching this guy like that, and I'm stretching this guy like this here, and then maybe I do, you know, a handful of other stretches here like that, and I'm like, oh man, I didn't mean to do that, and I blew everything out. But maybe I went and did like another handful of adjustments after that, and I was just, you know, kind of went down the road a little ways, and I was unhappy with where my image ended up. So here I blew everything up. The only way to actually go back and do anything on this is to go back in your Histories tab, and if you do it this way, there's just very little control of actually kind of going back and seeing what you're doing. So if you come over here in the History tab, I can go down here, I come back here, but there's, you know, there's not a way to actually kind of really adjust that very well. So one of the big things that I really work on doing when I'm processing is being very organized with layers and folders. And so let me come all the way back to the beginning here and show you what I mean. So there's a couple different ways to make a new layer. The easiest way to make a new layer is to actually click over here on this layer, which is your background, and it shows this little lock thing because your background is your background and you're not going to change that. And then you can drag this down. Just click with your left mouse button, hold it, drag down here to this little tab right here, and what it does is it creates a brand new layer. And so everything that you do until you change to another layer, you are doing to this current layer right here. So I can make a huge massive curve like this, blow everything out, but then I can go right back to where I was just by hiding that layer. So the way to hide and to show the layer is there's a little picture of an eyeball next to the picture over here, and you can click that on and off. So over here in Photoshop, it's going to give you kind of just a little icon that shows the layer that you're working on and what it looks like. There's a lot more things going on down here that we can talk about in future sessions, including making a mask like this and then a vector mask like that. But we won't get into this one, into that stuff too much today because it's a little bit more advanced stuff. But we will get into layers and folders just so that you can know what, kind of how to get yourself organized. So if you want to make moves, usually the way that to quickly create a new layer, like I said, is just to drag it down to that little tab here. And you can turn it on and off by showing the eyeballs. So you can also right-click on these layers if you don't like them, and you can delete them. So if I right-click on it and delete it, yes. Same thing here. If I'm unhappy with this layer, it's easy enough to delete it. And then I have the information right back to where I was. So it's real easy, especially if you start labeling your layers, then you know what you're actually doing. So another way you can make a new layer is you can come over here to Image, Adjustments, and come, Layer. I got lost with what I was doing. Come over to Layer and New Adjustment Layer, and you can pick any kind of adjustment layer that you want over here. You can see there's a lot of different options for it, but we'll just do a levels one since that's what we've been talking about. And I'm going to say, okay, this is one place where you can actually label it. And you can actually come in here and work on it this way. That is typically not how I actually like to do it, but it's cool because it kind of gives you this tab up here where you can work on your levels and do different things up here and actually kind of watch it. I'm going to recommend doing it the way that I just said to do it because it's the way I do it. It doesn't make it the right way, but it's just kind of the way I'm going to teach you today. And there's one final way that you can create a new layer, and I actually would suggest doing this and learning to do this all the time in Photoshop. I think that it's sort of the best way to work, but it's It was a shortcut that we learned from Scott Rosen and really almost completely changed my image processing, and that is to do a select all, edit, copy merged, and it's actually you can only do that once you have 2 layers, but I'm going to show you why. So select all, edit, copy, and then paste. And now say that I do something like put a curve on here, just have something that I want to put in here. If I just bring this down here like this, then I can make a new layer. However, if for some reason I changed the opacity or I made this a different kind of layer, like a screen layer, this is getting a little bit complicated, but it's kind of a fundamental thing, and I want to show you why I suggest doing it this way. If I drag this down now again and make a new layer, you can see that it actually changes the image. Even though I dragged it down, it's not bringing up the same image again. So dragging that down and making a new layer brought up a new layer where I have that same curve on there at that opacity. So that's not how I usually like to work, because I think it can kind of fool you into making a mistake. So what I usually like to do anytime I'm making a new layer is come over to select all, edit, copy merged, and then paste on top of that. And so there we go. So now you can see when I do that, it's not actually changing anything. So this is actually taking a snapshot of the picture as it is right there at that point in time, and it's pasting it on top, which you saw that doing this action where I actually slide this down here does not do. It brightens it up. And I think that, like I said, I think that can lead to mistakes. So
Josh, you don't know the keyboard shortcut for that, do you?
I do, and I'm going to show everyone how they can actually find the keyboard shortcut. So if you come up here and you come up to do what you want for these, you can actually see what the keyboard shortcuts are on almost everything in Photoshop. So here you would do to select all, as in like with most Microsoft documents, it's Control-A, and then if you want to copy merged, I actually need to select all, and then you want to copy merge, then Shift Control C. So it's Control A, then Shift Control C, and then to paste it, as you would expect, it's Control V. So the big one that you would have to, I guess, learn that's a new thing that you wouldn't typically use in maybe a Word document is Shift Control C to actually copy the merged. And so when it's telling you copy the merged, it's saying take a copy of everything that's over here as it is right now and make a new picture from that right there. So the other thing that I want to make sure that I get across here too is that kind of good housekeeping usually is to label your layers and what you're doing with them, especially as you're getting going. It's really good because then you can look back and you can know what you're doing. And if you when you get into more advanced processing, you might have 150 or 200 layers on an image. I like to make a new layer for pretty much every single thing I do, so that way I can go back to that point in time. And I typically still label at least folders, if not every layer, so that I know where I'm at in it. So you can click, double-click on the actual title of that layer and change it to what you want. So I might just call this first level stretch. Really, we're at the end of this image, but typically that would be one of the first things I do is a first level stretch. And so now when I come back, if I'm going to make another layer, kind of the way I just showed you, select all, edit, copy merged, and then paste on top, I might be doing kind of a darken level stretch now. Bring the backdrop, bring the black point back up over here, darken up the background, and so this one I might label darken level stretch. And so this way, kind of, you might go through and do a handful of these, but you can always look back in time and look at them. So the one other thing I'm going to show you before we get into processing an image and kind of just show you, I'll show you curves too, but is folders, just kind of another thing for good housekeeping. So right here, if you come over on the same tab where your layers are, there's a picture of basically a little folder, and I'm going to click on that little folder there, and you can do just sort of what you'd expect in a Windows program. You can highlight these two by hitting the first one and then Shift on the second one you want, or you can hit the first one and then Control on the other one you want, and then you can drag those right up into that group. So they call these folders groups, and what's cool about these groups is that if you clump them together into a group like this, then you can actually turn that whole group on and off. So not only is it good for organization because you can kind of see what you're working with, and you can start labeling these things, but you can also kind of group certain things together. And so down the road, when you get into maybe noise reduction, you might do all your noise reduction in 4 or 5 different layers, but you might want to put that all into a folder. And you might decide, well, I really like what I did here. Maybe I decide I really like kind of the stretch I did here, but it blew out this core a little bit, so I don't want it to be quite as strong, these actions I took. So there's this thing up here called the opacity slider. Essentially, that's saying I'm going to put this much opacity to this group right here, or you can actually do it on an individual layer as well. But so if it's 100% opaque, as you would think, then that's what you're seeing. Where you're at with this group is what you're seeing. If you slide it down to 50%, it's basically just blending this group here with that background layer that's visible underneath. And so if I slide it down to a 50% blend, then it's going to be 50% blend. If I slide opacity, it's going to be a 50% blend. If I go down to 0, it's the same thing as just turning it on and off, or turning it off. So you can see if I turn this group on and off here, there's no change at all. And that's really, really a powerful tool, using that opacity slider here, as well as grouping things together. So, like I said, if you're just getting going, it's really good to keep organized on this stuff. So I would call this my levels group. And then that way, if I'm going up, like I said, I may end up having 150 or 200 layers in a picture, and I may end up having 15 or 20 different groups for sharpening and color and curves and all that kinds of different stuff. So there's just it gets really good to be kind of organized when you're doing this stuff. But so the whole idea is kind of non-destructive processing, so that you always have this thing that you can go back to. So you can turn this group on and off as a whole. You can turn off individual layers, and you can always kind of go back to another point in time. And if you have, just to show you even a little more power in this, if you have 2 more layers, and one of them you do like a kind of a curve that you want to darken stuff up a little bit, and then you have another layer where you want to come up and do a big saturation boost on it, just because that's what you're trying to do, and say that I did that saturation boost first. I didn't like that too much. I thought it was too strong. I could turn the opacity down on that. And I didn't like this darkened curve here too much, so I turned the opacity way down on that. I just kind of like a little bit of what it did to the background. Then I can control that. If for some reason I really like a lot of what I did up here on top, but I didn't like that saturation boost, I can go back and turn off that saturation boost. Because I'm working at opacities that aren't 100%, you can actually see back in your processing time through to this first group. And even if I go down to a 50% blend here on that first group, then you can see all the way back to this background image in this image here. And this is how I really like, when you get comfortable with Photoshop, I like working all kinds of stuff and kind of differing opacities, and I think it's a good way to make incremental changes. I think one of the strongest assets that people have in processing are making kind of incremental changes. Any changes that you make that are too strong at once are going to usually have kind of a weird effect on your image. You might get like jagged edges, you might get too much noise, you might get kind of a bumpy looking background. There's just all kinds of things that can happen that are weird. So I just always recommend kind of small incremental changes. But this here shows you sort of the power of using layers and groups to put stuff together and to understand what you're actually doing. So I want to show you curves real quick if there's not any more questions, and then we'll go through and actually sort of quickly do the beginnings of processing an image. Adam,
keep moving on to curves, but Lance is asking, will you keep all those layers when you're done, or trash what you no longer care about?
That's a good question, Lance. So let me do these curves, and I'll show you what I might do sometimes, and I'll tell you the reason that I do it at that point too. It's a really good question, and there's good reason for it. So I'm going to just show you kind of the basics of curves here, and then we're going to go into processing. But so curves would be, you can either do Control M, which is the hotkey for it, or you can come up to Image, Adjustments, and Curves, just like kind of with everything else. So we will do a curves adjustment, and it looks sort of like a levels adjustment. However, you've got this line here coming straight across or diagonally across your image. One thing I forgot to mention in the levels is that you can actually do an adjustment for curves or levels on the entire image, or you can do it on the individual channels themselves. So you can see if I grab this red thing and drag it up there like that, then I'm just pulling that red curve up and affecting that. So you can do that same thing with the levels as well. Until you get a little more experience, I think typically it's probably better just to work on the RGB together. I can show you one trick for actually balancing in background if we have time later that is useful for splitting up those channels. But let's get there whenever I get over to that. So a curve is actually giving you kind of a little more control over what you're doing with your histogram here and where you're actually moving points. So if you're doing this as a levels adjustment, you have very little control, and this line is staying kind of straight. But what a curve can let you do is you can click on a point in your image that you want to kind of fix. So if I want to bring up some of this kind of brown background, but I want to keep the black sky the same color that it is and sort of black, then what I can do is I can come over here in my black area of the sky. I can hold down Control and left click on that area in the sky. Just as you would expect, this little dot that shows up on the histogram kind of shows up near the very left side of the histogram at the darkest part of what I want to kind of be showing in my image. So another thing that I want to do if I'm going to do a curve stretch is I probably want to keep my brightest spots sort of as bright as they actually are right now, because you saw that they are almost blown out. If we come up to the info tab, they're up here at 222, 234. I don't want those to get too much brighter, because if they do, they're going to go from being that pretty blue color to a white color, and I don't want to lose that blue color. So I can come over here and actually Control and click on that blue star over here as well, and that's going to sort of mount this point on my histogram too. And so I can just show you kind of what these, I think a lot of people call them anchor points, do. Essentially, if I grab this line anywhere else, you can see that those other points do not move. That point is still where it is, and this point is still where it is. Kind of a cool little trick with these as well is if I really stretch this a lot, even though you're not going to stretch it a lot because we said you're going to do just kind of small incremental moves, if I stretch this a lot, I'm actually going to even slide this point down just a little bit. But if I stretch this a lot here, then you can see it starts having sort of a big effect on the curve on the other side of that anchor point, which is not good because we don't want anything else over there moving really either. We want to kind of keep that data up there the same. We don't want to kind of going to a brighter spot. We don't want to go into a darker spot. And same thing also down at the bottom. If I were to kind of pick this curve up right here, then you can see down here on the left side, this curve is kind of dipping down quite a bit lower, and I'm losing that information. So one trick a lot of people might use is if you pick your two anchor spots here, you might actually want to drop in another anchor up here and another anchor down here. And what those will do is they'll help keep that line straight there. So you keep almost all that information over here that's down below this level of 23, 24. We keep it all pretty much where it is. So you come over here and And you can just click on that line and it'll create a new point for you. And it's a little bit picky over here to kind of try and drag that around and get it just precise. So I can actually come in here and type what I want. If that input tells you right here the input is 11, I want that output to be 11. So I don't want that thing moving. Then I'll do the same thing up at the top here. And it's giving me an input of 236. I don't want that point moving either. So I'm going to make that 236. And same thing with this one I dragged over. I'm going to make that an output of 215. So now what I should still have is pretty much a perfectly straight line. And what I'm trying to do is just bring up this kind of faint background to be a little bit brighter. And so to do that, I'm going to kind of do what you would expect, and I'm going to control and click on an area of that fainter background that I want to bring up. So if I wanted to make it more apparent that this kind of dust down here existed, I would control click on that. And so that's going to give me another spot over here on this line that's right at that exact value. And now I can grab this point here and I can kind of start dragging it, or I can come over here on the output and I can actually use my up and down arrow on my keyboard and bring that up. And so like I said, you want to do things incrementally, but you can see if you really push that curve way up, you can see that stuff really brightens up down here. In fact, on your curves thing, there's a little preview button. And so if you click that on and off, you can kind of see what this curves adjustment's doing. And you can see that this area down here really has a big impact. The interesting thing, even though all this other information is really getting blown out, this star is actually staying a pretty similar color, blue. And you can see that this sky background, if I click on and off, that information is staying pretty much the same right there, right where that little point is. So that's what those anchors do for you. They kind of let you adjust just the part that you want. So when we go to processing the other picture from scratch, you'll see sort of a reason or maybe a more generic curve that's used early on in processing. Because this picture is done, there's really not a lot that you want to do. Maybe somebody does like seeing that faint dust a little more, and you can see with this, even that makes a pretty big difference. So that curve does not look like a very strong curve, but clicking that preview on and off makes a big difference. So if you don't mind what it does to the rest of the picture, you can say OK. So there we go. So now I have a new layer here that brought this curve up. And so I might do just one more. And like I said, you can drag this down, but I don't recommend doing that. So I'm just going to select all, edit, copy, merge, and create a new layer. And this time, I might just want to brighten up the whole image overall. And so to brighten up kind of the whole image overall, you could just make a simple kind of arc curve like that. This does a good job of brightening up the image because, as you can see, it kind of brings up these low points, brings up the midpoints, and it brings up the high points. It brings up the midpoints more than anything else. And so this is kind of a good curve maybe that you might use towards the beginning of processing your image. But it's just another curve to show you. Another thing I recommend, if you ever do a curve like that, is always just to kind of bring your black point slider back over. Because you brighten the whole image up, and you want to kind of keep it the same as it was before the image started, or before that the background. You might want to keep that the same as it was before that adjustment started. So I'm just going to answer the question that was just asked: do I keep all these layers and groups when I'm done with them? And the answer is that yes, I do. But only to a certain extent. And the reason is that these files can become massive. You can see down here that I'm only one group and what, 1, 2, 3, 4 layers on top of my background. And this picture is already 250 megabytes. And this is a small picture. Usually I work with ones that are maybe 130 megabytes right off the bat because I do drizzle stacking. So they're really big. So what I might do here, I'll just come in here for good housekeeping and say that I brighten image and darken background. And here I'd say brought up midtones. And then I might just put those two into a group here and call that kind of brightness adjustments. And so what I would do here typically, and I try to do this, I don't like an image maybe to usually get over 250 to 500 megabytes, because once it starts getting larger than that, then it gets harder to work on, because everything just kind of bogs down and it gets slower and slower, and it gets harder to save and it takes forever to save. So what I might do here at this point is say, okay, I've made a lot of progress. I'm going to kind of just take a pause here and save it right where it's at. So, I might come in and save as, and just say that you can save it as a Photoshop document, which retains a lot of more information, or you can actually just do it as a TIFF, which will save your levels here for you, or your different layers here. It won't save your history for you, but it will save your different layers and groups. And I might just call this kind of demo PS. And so if I save that as demo PS, it'll ask you including layers will increase size. And so yeah, that's why we're saving it now, because we might end up with another 50 layers on here. You might end up with, I don't know, I think the most I've ever gotten to was like a 2 gigabyte document, and I don't think you want to go that high, or certainly don't want to go higher than that unless you have a supercomputer. So I would say okay, and so you've got it saved. And so you can see down here on my on the scrolling bar over here that it takes a while to save this, even at 500 megabytes. This is a pretty fast computer. I think it has 32 gigs of RAM and a solid-state drive. So I mean, I guess only at 250 megabytes, it takes a while. Once you get up to a 2 gigabyte one, it might take a few minutes even to save it. But once I save that, so the question is, do I actually keep all of these? If I can come back in time and grab this picture at any point like it was, then I feel comfortable not saving those layers. So what I can do is come over here on any layer in the image and right-click on it, and I can flatten the image. Problem is, as soon as you flatten the image, you can't make any adjustments to any of these layers in between. So you should really be sure that you want to flatten it before doing that. But that essentially just dropped it down from a 250 meg file down to a 50.1 meg file. So once I do that, I might come in here and actually create a new layer and call it, this is my levels and curves adjustment picture, and start working from there. So hopefully that answered that question all right. And if we don't have any other questions, Adam, I'll go in and kind of start on this new picture.
Maybe I'll ask one question just for the sake of it, or maybe I'll make a comment and then ask the question. But curves can basically do everything levels can, but levels can't necessarily do everything that curves can. When would you use one and when would you use the other?
Short answer is I use levels at the very beginning, and then I use curves from then on out. Long answer is that you're right, and it really depends.
Yeah, I'm sorry, in asking the question, I was kind of getting at that. Probably levels at the beginning, curves maybe towards the end, because curves are more pointed, and
yes,
do more. Just at the beginning, when you're stretching, it barely seems like it matters, being very pointed in what you're doing.
Right.
That was kind of where I was going with that.
And I will show that kind of.
Okay.
I might take a little different steps than what I'll show, but this is kind of, I'll show the routine that I used as a beginner for a long time here in Photoshop. So yeah, so short answer is levels at the beginning, curves after that, and I will show you why here as we get into this new image. So if that's it, we'll go into the new image. I'm going to close these out, and since we've been doing a lot of processing on M42 recently, I will do a different image for you guys. So, like I said, I always like to make a new layer before doing anything, and typically, I actually usually like to keep my background as is. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to create a new layer. As I said, if you only have one layer, then you can't copy merge because there's nothing to merge. There's nothing merged with that background layer, so you would just copy the layer as is and paste a new one on. And so we did a lot of talking about a histogram, and there's all kinds of great information on that other histogram that I showed you. And this histogram, there's really not much information at all, at least you don't think, because it looks like all there is just a little bit of stuff over here on the left-hand side. That's fine. That's what a picture is supposed to look like when it comes out of your pre-calibration. We've done a couple shows on pre-processing, calibrating, and integrating your data. We've done that in PixInsight. I think we've done one in Nebulosity. We might have done one in Deep Sky Stacker. So we have lots of information if you want to look back at those, or obviously if you search the web, you're going to find plenty of information. But this is what a picture should look like if you bring it into Photoshop as a 16-bit TIFF, which is what you want to be working in. So we already talked about this white point and looking at the information on it, and we see that there's really no information here. So I'm just going to slide that white point slider over just a little bit so that I get to the point where everything I'm doing is useful. So I said that I also like to use a new layer every time I do anything, and typically that's right. I might not do it for every single level stretch, but I will do it for. I'm going to show you kind of how I like to break it down as we go through. Once you get through this kind of initial stretching is where I really do a new layer for everything. This initial stretching, I might not use one, and you'll see why here. I'm going to do a levels adjustment, and like I said, you can do Control-L, or you can go up and select it in your image adjustment levels. You get used to using the hotkeys, so that's a good thing to use those hotkeys. So, like we said, here's that histogram that doesn't have a ton of information. You can even see that there's so little information up here on the bright side that there's actually little gaps in here, and that's fine. It's to be expected when you're just kind of opening an image. But here's where we're going to start using the midpoint slider to kind of bring the data out here in the picture. It looks like it's really completely black, and if I come over here and use the color sampler tool, it looks black. It's pretty much black all the way around. You can see there's just a little bit of information. But what I'm going to do is start with my levels here, and I'm going to start sliding that to the left. And I'll tell you, because that data is so small there, we actually probably underexposed. This is a picture that Adam and I did a while back of BDB 152, I think. So what I did here is I just slid this slider, the midpoint slider, over to the left, and what I'm trying to do is kind of bring that information up to the visible surface. And so I think people talk a little bit differently, and there's been some studies done on whether or not you can do this all at once, or you kind of want to do it in different stretches. As you're sliding it around, especially if you do a big stretch, it'll give a posturized kind of appearance. And I think that it actually retains that, is my opinion. I think other people might counter that. But if I let go here, you can see, and hit OK, you can see that posturized look kind of goes away. I still think it retains it a little bit. I think that it kind of plays with the data some, but I don't have any evidence to back that up, so maybe somebody a little smarter than me in Photoshop could explain if that's really true or not. So, as I said, I like to do incremental adjustments. So we know that we need to move this histogram that's up against the left-hand wall over to the right. And the way to move that information in the histogram over to the right is to slide this midpoint slider over to the left. So I will never slide a slider more than maybe 0.3, 0.4, something like that. And as I get further along in the processing, I would never slide the midpoint or that black point slider more than even less than that. The midpoint 0.3 or 0.4, and the black point I might, at most move like 5, 6 spots, and that's about it. So I'm going to move this midpoint slider over to 1.4, and then I'm going to just keep doing that kind of in small incremental adjustments until I see this histogram coming off the wall. The more I see it come off the wall, kind of the smaller adjustments I'll make. And to answer Adam's question before, you can kind of see this is why I might just use only levels in the beginning, because there's a handful of moves you have to make here before you even really have anything to play with. You can see now, just with 3 pretty big slides there, some information starting to come up. This whole background looks super dark. There's not very many stars, but if I hide and show the picture here, you can see there's a little bit of nebulosity coming through right here. These stars are kind of faint stars are starting to show their face, and the less faint stars are starting to get a little bit bigger and show the colors that they have. So I'm going to keep going though, because we don't quite have this histogram off the wall yet. But I do see just a tiny bit of separation at the top, so I'm going to get a little gentler with my stretches and come down to 1.3. And I'm going to do that again. You can see now I'm starting to get some separation over here. So I might go down to 1.25, somewhere around there. And I'll probably do one or two more of those. What I'm usually looking to get to is a background value of somewhere around 25 to 35 to 45, somewhere in that range, so that I have something to work with here. It might even go all the way up to 50 with this initial stretching. So I'm going to do one more probably just to brighten it up just a little bit more here. And I'm, like I said, kind of going down to more and more incremental moves here. So this one's 1.15. Now the background's looking pretty bright with the levels. And so at this point, this is going to be my last kind of initial levels adjustment. I'm happy that I brought this histogram over, and I'm starting to stretch it out a little bit. I told you you like to see this histogram being a little bit wider. The wider it is, kind of the more kind of I would say beautiful your image looks, but kind of like the more you're making the range and the more information you're kind of presenting to the viewer. And so getting that wider, you're just showing kind of more variety of data in there. So basically, you can think of it as moving to the left is going to kind of stretch that histogram to the right, and moving to the right is going to stretch that histogram a little to the left. So now I want to bring this black point slider almost all the way over to the edge here. Like I said, I'm only going to do small moves, so I might come up to 6 here, and then I might do one more just to kind of bring it up again, and then one more to do it again. What I'm trying to do is I don't want to go all the way over to the inside of this data here, otherwise I'm clipping the black points, and that's what we talked about, is we don't want to clip the black points. You can see there's just a little bit of information down here on the bottom left of that kind of vertical peak there. That's right about where I'm going to bring that black point slider over to. And so now the background is back down to around 15, 30, 20, somewhere in that range, and you can see there's a lot more going on in this image now. If I hide and show this, you can see all of a sudden this nebulosity is starting to show here. A lot more nebulosity kind of in this area here. And if I zoom way in here, kind of in this dark region, you can see there's almost no stars at all visible here. And just those simple moves do a lot to kind of start your picture right there. So as I said, just kind of good housekeeping. I'm just going to call this initial levels. Okay. And now, what I want to do is do a curves adjustment. And so I am almost done with using levels altogether, but I'm going to show you how I might use it one more time. But so I'm going to do a curves adjustment. And I told you that sometimes you just really want to kind of brighten an image up a lot just to see what's in there. You can just make this big giant arc here. You can see that brings almost everything out right there. However, what I want to do before I do that is I like just having just a little bit of separation kind of between the bright data and the midpoint and the dark data here. I think this might still be just a little too dark to do this. This is a really tough object to process. But what I do want to do is make sure that I keep these really bright things from blowing out. As you can see, these stars are really bright, and they're probably pretty close to blown out already, but we want to keep those where they're sort of at, and we want to bring up these low points just a little bit more, just kind of get a little more useful information here. So I might grab, just grab sort of right here in the middle of the histogram, and just bring that up just a little bit. And you can see what doing that does is it kind of brings out the background sky, brings up this nebulosity just a little more, and it keeps the bright stars sort of the same color they are without getting too much brighter. So I'm going to do two curves like that, where I kind of anchor these bright points again. And I'm going to pull up this histogram one more time here, just a little bit at a time. And I still want my image to end up kind of around 35, 30, 25, somewhere in that range at the end. Usually I like to work with my image just a little bit brighter than I'm going to do as my kind of final presentation. So now is where I would go back and do just another levels adjustment. So I'm going to call this the brightening curves. Okay, and then I'm going to do one more layer here. And I'm going to use levels to kind of bring this black point slider back over just a little bit. And so you can see this is sort of an iterative process. So if you go all the way back to the beginning of the image, it's really dark. And I'm doing a little bit of initial levels just to kind of bring stuff up. And then I'm going to do a lightning curve to really bring out kind of this information down here. Then I'm going to do the levels curve to bring it back, being a little bit darker. But now what we have is, I'm going to create a new layer for you. What we have is a little bit of separation between the nebulosity and the sky background, which is good because I want to take advantage of that separation. If I tried to do that down at this point, and I give you kind of a couple of good pieces of data on here. Let me delete these other icons here so we don't get confused about what we're talking about. I'm going to come in here, and so the second data point here is going to be 14, 14, 15, which is kind of our sky background. That's really dark. The dust in here, if I click on it, is pretty much exactly the same color. This third data point here is 14, 15, 17. So if I tried to use a curves adjustment to actually separate these two right now, there's nowhere to separate it because they're the same. So I couldn't grab like a part here and a part here and try and get a little separation between them. So that's why using that brightening curve, where I just try and brighten the whole kind of lower half of the image, helps out a lot. As you can see, all of a sudden, my number 2 is down at 33, 32, 34, and my number 3 is up at 39, 36, or 35, 34. So just that little bit is going to help me enough here to actually start playing with these data. And even after that kind of darkening level there, I still have enough separation that I can play with it. So I'm going to call this darkening levels. And then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to do one more curve and kind of show you where the pointing curve comes from that I was talking about. What I want to do is, I'm pretty happy with where the sky background is, so I want to anchor that right where it is. And I can left click on it and that gives me an anchor. And I'm going to use that little tip that we talked about here, and I'm going to put another anchor point in just to make sure that I'm still actually keeping that as straight as possible. And then I'm going to come over here, and you can see by control clicking in this area, which is still very dark but just a little bit different than the sky background, I can actually start showing some real separation in there. So if I really exaggerate this, you can see that really starts popping off of there. I can even come up to these stars up here and click on them and make sure that they're staying on that straight line. And then what I've done is I've kept the stars the same output, I've kept the sky background the same output, and I've really brought up this middle point. Like I said, you kind of want to do that in small baby steps, so I might do that same curve 3 separate times. So just kind of coming in here and doing that, you can see that the separation should sort of grow each time that I do that. I come up and grab this bright star again, throw in my anchor point, throw in another anchor point up here, get this one down to match that, and this guy, I'll just pull up a little more. So you can see just a couple small incremental moves. This is very noisy because I don't have any luminance data in here, but it just kind of shows you how you can start getting a little separation in an image here. And that's kind of the beauty of the curves, kind of the targeted curves here. And so I think that at this point, I'm probably going to stop here because I think that this is where we would probably start getting to more advanced topics like masks and noise reduction and everything like that. But with a good set of data, you could do these moves right here and get a beautiful looking image in probably about 10 minutes. You know, if it's a really faint target like this, or a really difficult target, or maybe the data is not so good, then you're going to have to do some other Photoshop tricks and start taking advantage of more advanced things. But the really good set of data, I mean, you can pretty much get a really good image just by knowing these few things right here. So at this point, I'm probably just going to stop the presentation and see if there's anything else that anyone wants covered, any other questions, or anything that anybody in the room can think of.
Walter is asking, for this image, when you examined the image off the camera, was the histogram that far to the left before you said the histogram of the camera back needed to be about a third of the way from the left? And I think that question came up when we were looking at the histogram as it would have come out of pre-processing, so it was very compressed and off to the right, or excuse me, the left. My right on my screen. But maybe if you get what the question is and where I'm going with that.
Yeah, so this was not taken with a DSLR. If it was, then that histogram would probably look more like what the histogram looks like now. So the back of that DSLR is going to kind of give you a pre-stretch and look at that histogram, and it's going to show you where that information is in the pre-stretch there. In a CCD, same thing. If I'm using SGP maybe, or nebulosity, it's going to do an automatic stretch, and it's going to show you a histogram that sort of looks like this. In reality, your histogram doesn't look like this when you actually capture the data right off the back of the camera. You've got all of your information sort of is compressed, as Adam said, but what you want to do is kind of look at the values depending on what you're using. So if you're using something like nebulosity, you might have those same values of 0 to 255 to actually preview your image when it comes off of the camera. And you might want to look at your background values. If your background values are down around 0 or 5 or 10, something like that, then you're probably too dark, and you need to get off that wall some there. If they're up around like 150 or 200, then you're probably blowing it out, and that would be the histogram being over here. So I guess the answer is that most acquisition programs, as well as the back of your camera, is going to do a pre-stretch and give you an idea of what the histogram looks like. When you're actually done calibrating and pre-processing your data and you bring it into Photoshop, if you do it right, it's going to be all kind of hugged up against the wall. Now, the only thing I might say is different for is super bright nebulosity, or something like the moon, where your full frame is, or much of your frame is filled with a very bright object.
Awesome. And I only had one comment, and if you wouldn't mind pulling up curves for me. One thing that I think I found valuable when I was starting out, and maybe I'll preface this with a point, is when we say clipping your black point, sometimes beginners think that it means you're just making your background too dark, but you're actually losing data when you do that. You're throwing away data. And Josh, the show clipping checkbox, do you mind checking that? So right there, this is actually displaying to you all of the data that you are throwing out. And if you can see any patterns in there, you're probably throwing out valuable data. And if you're just trying to understand what overstretching is, or when you are at the white point or the black point, that's a good place to get an idea as to how much leeway you have. That's just one thing that I wanted to point out, because it shows you everything you're throwing away, and you don't want to throw anything away. Now, if he had a lot of space to the right of the histogram there, he'd have a lot of room and it would stay black. There you go. So it's mostly black there because he's not throwing away much. But look what he is throwing away, his star color on the white point side. He's throwing away star color. That's the first thing you see in there.
And then the black point, you can see that we don't have much separation from the wall, so as I slide that in, if I slide that black point, even just come into this histogram just a little bit, you can see there is tons of information there that you would be losing. And that's why you always want to keep a little bit of separation there from that sort of that peak and what you're doing. You actually creating, as soon as you get into your histogram at all, you're creating holes in your image, and you're basically creating black holes in your image. As you get further and further in, you can actually start turning stuff just completely black, and as we showed before, you can't recover that information. So so right now there's nothing clipped, and so that backdrop in the sky, if I turn off this show clipping, we can do stuff with anything in this picture right now, whether it's the darkest part or the brightest part. We're not clipping either the white point or the black point, so every bit of information in this picture right now is in play, and that's what you want to do as much as possible, is keep pretty much the entire image in play.
Yeah, because as Josh did say earlier, you don't really know what's there until you start stretching it. That's one of the when you get into Photoshop versus PixInsight, PixInsight tries to show you all that data there before you stretch it, or makes it so you don't have to. With Photoshop, you do have to stretch it a bit to see what's there. Of course, you know what popped in my head?
The equalization.
Oh no, when you did the adjustment layer and you overstretched it, I thought, hey, maybe we could use that as like an STF and then just get rid of that adjustment layer. But then again, maybe you don't need to, because.
Well, so there are just a couple of interesting ways to kind of, as a sidetrack to get a quick preview of what's going on in the image. And one is, like you said, is we can do a curves and just really kind of stretch the heck out of a curves. And actually, whoops, I have these guys showing. So if I do a curves here and just really stretch it, you can start seeing a little information, but you have to do quite a few of them. The other one that we saw, I can't remember, somebody told us about that. One of our guests told us about that move right there, and that is equalization. And it's really interesting. It basically shows you, I wouldn't say it's like an STF, and I don't know the technical term of what it shows you, but it shows you what's in your data. And so if you're just curious, if you really completely overstretched everything and weren't careful about processing and wanted to blow it all out, you can go up to, I'll do it again one more time here for this layer, go up to Image, Adjustments, and Equalize. So if anybody in the room knows technically exactly how that works, that would be great to pipe up. But you can, as you can see, if I do that equalize and then I show all these layers, it kind of shows pretty similar to what I have in there, but it does it without regard to blowing anything out. So I mean, it's not something you would probably ever want to use as an actual move, but it kind of has a similar effect as an STF, as Adam was talking about in PixInsight.
Awesome. Any questions, comments inside the room, or outside the room for that matter? I don't see any. Any follow-up comments or anything, Josh? I think I've covered everything I've got.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything. Typically we probably do more advanced stuff on the Astro Imaging channel, and maybe we cover stuff that is above people's heads, but we always love to kind of do what people want to see. So if anybody has any requests ever for kind of what they would like to see done, or follow-up questions to these, I see once in a while that we get questions on YouTube, and I think it's hard to keep up with the comments that are on YouTube as much. So if you post them on the post on the Astro Imaging channel, or you contact either of us, but any of the guys on the Astro Imaging channel, I think we're all busy, but we're always more than happy to help. I know David does kind of private tutorial sessions here and there, and I've done quite a few myself. So, I think that don't be afraid to ask for help from any of us or anybody on the forums, and also don't be afraid to ask for sessions on stuff like this. seems like maybe there was a good response and we got a lot of people in the room tonight. So if we want to follow up this with another Photoshop one at some point to kind of take the next steps in Photoshop, more than happy to do it. Same thing with presenting style and kind of what works for you guys and what doesn't. Do you have comments on ways to make it easier to follow these? We're always happy to help out with that stuff.
I agree, and this is actually the way we started out with basic beginner tutorials. I think at the time it's the limit of what a few of us were comfortable with, just the beginner stuff, and as we progressed, we kind of got onto more advanced stuff. But in the spirit of what Josh said, if you're struggling with something, let us know. If you post on Cloudy Nights or just contact us, and it's something you want to kind of work through in a session, let us know, and maybe we'll devote a session to it. We are always looking for whether it be presenters or just a topic for a session. And we don't know what's going to be popular, but sometimes we're surprised by what gets a response and what really is popular. And Photoshop, Astro processing for beginners, histograms, curves, levels, it's something that everyone's going to go through. So I think that's why this one seemed to be so popular. Lots of RSVPs, lots of online viewers, live viewers. But that's basically it for tonight's session. Nothing scheduled yet for next week. It's not yet the Super Bowl. I think we're going to take the Super Bowl week off rather than competing with them. But I'll have something posted probably midweek on a session. And yeah, that's probably it. Anyone in the room have anything else to share with the public?
I just wanted to say thanks. That was really good, Josh. The Photoshop stuff is like you say, something we all start with, and a lot of us, including myself, have jumped over into the cult of PI, PixInsight. So it's good to get back to the basics, because a lot of the stuff you're doing in PixInsight is related to all of this same sort of stuff anyway, with the histogram and the levels and the curves, and you can't really substitute for knowing the basics and the mechanics of how they work too. So thanks for that.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Dylan. Just a little teaser. At some point in the next few weeks, David, Alton, and I will be doing a presentation where we actually process in both PixInsight and Photoshop. There's a lot of guys who still like to use both programs, and we had a fun practice session today where we passed an image back and forth for a while and got all the way through it and made quite a pretty image. So look forward to that at some point in the near future.
Well,
yeah,
cool.
it was a lot of fun anyway, just for us, right? So it should be an interesting presentation one way or the other.
Adam, I do have something happening in April. Dennis Mamana, who is a World at Night imager, he takes beautiful pictures of combining terrestrial landscapes with starscapes of various kinds, and he also a travel guide. He took me up to Alaska for the Aurora Borealis. Anyway, he's coming out to our dark sky site in April, and in April he's going to have a big class out there. And if you're interested in signing up for it, well, I know we've got a lot of people in Southern California undoubtedly listening on the Astro Imaging channel. And Dennis offers these classes regularly down in Anza Borrego, but he'll be up at GMARS, our site out in the California desert up in Landers. April 9th and 10th, I think it is, and you'll be able to find out more in at the rivastro.org website as soon as we get it organized and get it out there. But that just happened yesterday or the day before. So that'll be cool.
Awesome. And then NEAF's coming up around that time, right? What is NEAF the next week?
I think it's the same time.
Same time.
Yeah, same time. The problem I got with NEAF is that it's on a new moon weekend, and I know that they don't have that much control over it. And I think there's 2 new moon weekends that month, stuff like that. But is it worth me traveling 2,500 miles and also missing out on the dark sky weekend? So I wish those guys could get it to full moon weekend or something. But,
And one more point on that too. We will have representation down at the Winter Star Party. I'll be down there in February. So if you have any questions or want to chat about it, I'll be setting up a vendor booth there, and I'll be hanging out for the week. So feel free to come by and say hi.
Who are you vending for?
I'm actually going to be bringing some of these pictures that we did a presentation with Greg Marshall on. So we'll have a handful of those down there. I'll have some more information on those as well. And certainly we'll be in some of the processing programs. So you can find me at the booth or in the giant big rectangle skybox set up there.
Or out on the beach.
And at the beach.
Awesome. And Tolga's asking if anyone's going to any AIC, NEAC or NE, and I'm not.
Just to be sure everybody knows, NEAF itself is a big trade show with lots of vendors and everything else like that. I think everybody knows that. But NEAC, Northeast Astro Imaging Conference, is on Thursday and Friday. Yeah, Thursday and Friday beforehand. Right, it's 2 days, and big show in town. And same place, and it's really a lot of good imagers there and a lot of good people to talk to. The big value of going to these things is that you run into people and you can just turn to the guy next to you and say, I don't understand how to do this or that or the other thing, and what have you found out about this or that or the other thing? And it really is nice to go to those kinds of things. But yes, is anybody out there going? Who was it that said that we should all have our cloudy night names on our name tags? And I said, I already do, because I use my own name for my name tag. So.
All right. Well, we'll get all that figured out. We have a few months to plan that. Maybe even we'll have. I know I'm going to NEAP, so maybe we'll catch up there. But guys, thanks for coming. We will see you next week. Like I said, session should be posted sometime midweek. And see you next week. Have a good one.